Hello, my name is Mary Grace Guzman. I am an ethics and professional responsibility attorney, and I've been invited by CEB and the California Minority Council Program to provide the fourth CLE in a series or boot camp presentations on effective speaking and providing CLEs. So we're going to get into the agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about, teaching. Why do we teach CLEs? Meeting our learning objectives. How best to prepare your CLE. Debrief, improve, and repeat. A little bit about myself. I started doing CLEs when I first became licensed. I was invited by the Contra Costa Diversity Program to give their diversity CLE. But after that, I joined Fishkin and Slater, and my mentor and supervising partner had realized that, one, I'm one of very, very few people of color doing legal ethics work. And in order for me to, one, gain a name for myself, and to also, which is probably most importantly for me, is to develop my list of clients, he encouraged me and expected me to give CLEs. And so he and I started together. He had drafted the material, and I was his baby associate. And I'll get into a little bit more about those presentations and how they evolved. So why do we teach CLEs? We have to get, as licensed attorneys in California, we have to complete a series of CLE continuing education requirements, 36 units, 4 units are ethics, 1 unit is elimination of bias, 1 unit must be competency or alcohol abuse, and then 30 units of anything we're interested in. And so we have to do these CLEs, and how do you complete them? You can complete them by attending a CLE or listening to a recorded one like this one is here. You can do a self-study, which is usually in a article, either on bar associations, usually have articles that are CLEs, and then you answer questions. You can write an article, and think about writing an article. And it is related to our presentation here, because many of our CLEs that you're giving can actually turn into short articles that can be published in, journals, association magazines, and so forth. And then you can, like I said, teach, which is why we're here at this boot camp, and then lecture at law schools. I encourage you to do that if you have an opportunity. So what happens if we don't comply? Okay, there is a consequence for not complying with your ethics, and that is that you can be disciplined. You can face fines, you can have a temporary suspension or actual discipline. More recently, there was and I put it in the materials, the State Bar did a study, and what it has found is that people of color are more likely to experience discipline and are more likely to experience, actual complaints. And whom is most likely to experience this? It is African-American males are more likely to be disciplined by the State Bar than any other group. The reason why I bring this up with regard to CLEs is that when you're facing discipline, there's this thing called mitigation that we use to offset the potential of actual discipline. When you're doing CLEs and you're involved in your legal community, you're less likely to experience significant discipline. So that's one of the many reasons why I encourage presentation and getting involved in giving CLEs. Now, the other reason why I encourage giving CLEs is that oftentimes, I know that I've experienced this, that often I'm watching a CLE and I don't necessarily see people of color. I rarely see people who look like myself giving CLEs. And so that's another reason why it's absolutely important that we as people of color give CLEs. And when you are giving CLEs, the state bar requires you to provide and meet learning objectives. I know that for this presentation, CMCP and CEB required that I meet certain unit requirements, which was, and I'll get into this in a second. When you give your presentation, the speaker actually gets 4 units. And so this is the units that you get for preparing your CLE. Then if you repeat your CLE, so you give it a second time, you would only get 1 unit. If you are a moderator, you also get units for being the moderator. When you're putting together your CLE to meet the state bar requirements, it isn't just enough to give your CLE. You can't just present. In my case, I've given you all a PowerPoint. That isn't enough to meet the requirements for the required materials. You also have to have additional materials. And that would be, in my case, for this presentation, I included the state bar rules. I included some cases that discuss the role of CLEs and potential case that's about discipline. I included an article about giving CLEs, and then I included the state bar most recent study on diversity and discipline. Those would be the materials. You don't have to limit yourself to that. If you're, for example, doing a presentation on litigation and motion practice, maybe you include writing samples or outlines, but the outline cannot be the outline specifically to your presentation. It has to be supplementary, and it has to be expansive of the actual presentation itself. Now, how best to prepare? It's essential that you prepare. So where do you start? Choose a subject matter. Choose a subject matter that interests you. It doesn't have to be, and I think this is something that happens to people of color more often than not, is that we get, I don't want to say pigeonholed, but we get in more often than not invited to do an elimination of bias. And I think it's great. You should do it if that's what interests you. But I also think that it's essential for us as people of color to choose practice areas that we're interested in. Do something that, I don't care how obscure it is, do a presentation that interests you. I use the example of listening to NPR or listening to podcasts. One of my favorite podcasts is a podcast on, and I'm just going to be honest with you, teaching your brain to knit. Sounds bizarre, but I can listen to it ad nauseum because of the fact that these women do an amazing presentation. They prepare themselves, they do their research, they're talking about knitting, and they're talking about the brain, and it is fascinating to me. And I encourage you to do something that you find fascinating, because it will be exciting for you and it will be exciting for your listener. When you prepare, you do your research. I know that seems like a no-brainer, but you really should be doing your research. You should read whatever you research, and don't be afraid to repeat it, because you might find something and you might want to move into and go down that rabbit hole. We as lawyers like to do that. And then you want to organize your presentation. We've all attended presentations and CLEs where you felt that it wasn't very well organized. So pay attention to that. Make sure your presentation is organized. I like hypotheticals, especially if it's a live presentation. I'll do some hypotheticals. Another one is to present and create your material so it encourages discussion. That also is helpful, because then you're not talking the whole time, and it gives you a break. You practice and you practice and you practice, stand in front of a mirror, especially if you're not super experienced. You want to get feedback on your presentation before giving your presentation. So with this presentation, for example, I shared it with CEB. CEB gave me feedback. And the reason why I did this was I have never done a presentation on how to do a presentation, and I've never had to teach my methods on how I present. I do a lot of presentations throughout the year. This year alone, I think I will have completed about 7 CLEs, either by myself or with groups. I've also written an article, and I'm now writing blogs for CEB. So I do a lot, but I've never had to do something where I'm actually presenting information on how I do this. So this is new to me. So I asked for lots and lots of feedback. Now, here are your do list. Most importantly, be yourself. So that is why I'm sharing with you that I've never done a presentation on how to do a presentation. I'm being myself. I also struggle with remembering that I am an expert. I've been practicing legal ethics for, I think it's almost 10 years. For most of my legal career, I've been practicing legal ethics. I'm technically an expert. I don't always feel like an expert. So I have to remind myself that I am an expert. I think that's difficult sometimes for people of color to be seen as experts. And sometimes it's even difficult for us to accept ourselves as experts. Organize your presentation in a cohesive manner. I know I've repeated this once before. The reason why is that there's nothing worse than sitting at a CLE where it feels disorganized and it feels like the presenter isn't familiar with that information. Create an outline for yourself that you use, but also create an outline that yours for your audience and attendees to use. I like PowerPoints. Not everyone does. I do. And when you're creating your PowerPoint, incorporate visual images, video, sound bites. Those are always great because it helps to expand your presentation so you're not talking the whole time, because it can be exhausting. And encourage discussion. It would have been great if we could have had this live, because I would love to hear what other people have to say about their experiences, if they've done CLEs, or why they might be a bit intimidated by CLEs. How they've improved, and which we're going to get into in a second, how you've debriefed. But encourage the discussion. And then know your presentation and know your material. It seems like a no-brainer. We as attorneys have to know our material, but the reality is that we're going to get caught off guard. Someone's going to ask you a question that you simply don't know. And that's okay too. And that's why the next one is if you don't know the answer, don't be afraid to say, I don't know, and I will get back to you. That has happened to me. A presentation that I gave this year, there was a question about where should an attorney who acts as a mediator place money paid in advance by non-clients. Do they place it in the IOLTA account, or do they place it in the operating account? The reality is I didn't know, and it's to this day I don't know the answer to. I've asked other mediators, and no one knows the answer to it, because your IOLTA account is for your client funds. So I told them I didn't know, and I would get back to them, and I did get back to them, and I said, essentially, the case law is unclear as to what should happen. So, that is my real life experience of my having to say, I'll get back to you all. It didn't hurt me. I think it helped me in the end because I didn't give bad information. And so your do not list. Number one, don't doubt yourself. You are an expert. I say that because I can doubt myself. I've experienced my own doubt. And I think it's hard, especially if you're a first generation, attorney of color, you're doing everything for the first time. And so and we are in a practice area that you have to be always perfect at. So it's easy to doubt yourself about your skill set. It's easy to doubt yourself about why you're standing before someone. So I stress this, do not doubt yourself. Also, there's nothing worse than sitting in a CLE and watching someone read the CLE verbatim. It's boring. It's, it's just a terrible presentation style. So, of course, there are going to be times where you will have to read something because you may not have your presentation memorized, or the rule is such that you can't not paraphrase. So yes, of course, you're going to have to read, but don't read the whole thing. Personally, I don't ever read, and I don't prepare my presentation, like a written out speech, mostly because of the fact that and I'm just going to be really honest here, I have dyslexia, and reading out loud, I'm going to mess up the words. So I generally avoid reading out loud. And so that's my personal habit. Again, what works for me may not work for someone else. My presentations are generally bullet points. Also, never make up an answer, no matter what. If someone asks a question that you do not know the answer to, don't make it up. 2 reasons. One is there's always someone there who's attending this presentation because it applies to something that they're currently thinking about or working on. And if you answer the question wrong, that attorney may be lazy and go with how you answered it and apply it to their client's work. The other thing is it makes you look bad. You're supposed to be an expert. You're always better off saying, I don't know, versus making up an answer or not applying the test properly. Which leads me to avoid giving legal advice or opining on an attorney's existing matter. Try to avoid that, especially in a large crowd, especially if it's being recorded. This happens to me all the time. I practice legal ethics. So there's always an attorney who raises their hand and wants to talk about their particular client situation. I generally advise them that I'm not going to answer the question live. I offer them the opportunity to speak with me afterwards. This also creates an opportunity for me to then get to know that attorney and possibly develop a client in that space and in that moment. Other times, though, I will not necessarily give advice, but if the attorney is saying something that is so wrong that I have to say, no, this is how you're supposed to do it. And that's okay to do, but you really need to understand the difference between correcting someone in the audience who's truly understanding something wrong. For example, an attorney, in my case, there was an attorney who was talking about receiving prepayments for legal fees and placing it in their operating account and never placing it in their IOLTA account. Simply, that's wrong. This isn't legal advice. This is, don't do this, because what you're doing is commingling. So I immediately corrected them. I immediately explained to them that you really need to be placing the money into the IOLTA account, and I named the rule, and that's Rule 115 of the Rules of Professional Responsibilities. I encouraged them to refer to it and read it closely on how to manage their prepayments and retainers. At that point, I offered to speak with them one-on-one if they wanted to discuss their particular situation, and that attorney did take that opportunity. Also, never under-prepare. It's easy to do. And don't lose control of your audience. Again, that happened to me at the recent MCLE, my last live MCLE that I did before COVID. I was doing a presentation style that's I normally don't do, and I'm starting to incorporate now, which was hypotheticals. And during the hypotheticals, everyone I would present, the goal was that we would present the hypothetical, the audience would answer the question, and then I would guide them through the hypotheticals and help, kind of like a professor would, in helping them understand the material. What happened was that it turned into a very lively debate where we had half the room on one side and the other half the room on the other. Both of them were wrong and they were shouting at each other. I finally had to I literally rose my hand and said, hello, I'm the presenter. You all signed up to see me. It wasn't my finest moment when I said that, but I did say that in front of the whole crowd. Everyone laughed. I was yelling to get their attention. Again, not my finest moment, but I then had to correct them and guide them to and explain to them why their understanding and their application of the rules of professional responsibility was simply wrong. And it was both sides were wrong. And then I had to shut down the communication and move on to the next piece. And I'm going to get into what I learned from that in a second. All right, so you've organized your presentation. You've picked a topic that you're really interested in and that you love, ideally, okay? And you've given your CLE to your group of people, and now what do you do next? Most important thing is you want to debrief. You want to think about what did you learn from that speaking engagement? How do you learn this information? Well, first, you're going to identify what worked and didn't work. Okay, I'm going to use a couple of examples. Like I said, the hypothetical where I lost control of the audience. Obviously, my losing control of the audience, that moment, it didn't work. What did work were the hypotheticals because I got the audience to talk. Yay me. What would I have done differently? I would have intervened sooner before the audience literally divided in two and I had people standing up and pointing fingers at each other. I would have read my audience a bit better sooner. Now, you want to read, everyone who attends CLEs are offered the opportunity to give feedback. I'm not going to lie, most people either give 5s or 1s, and then they don't say anything at the end. I like to look, if they're just marking off numbers and ticking numbers, I really like to look at the ones who are giving, because the list of questions often have very specific questions, rate the speaking style, rate the materials, rate the, they go down through, the person's knowledge. And so I really like to look at those types of questions, and I try to find the people who have not given me all 1s, because that person, I could have given them candy and $1 million and they probably still wouldn't have liked me. And the same is true for the person that gave me all 5s. But I want to look for the person that gave me a variety of numbers. And those individuals are the ones that you want to look at and think about what they had to say. Those who write information, especially those who write negative comments, number one, don't take it personally. Okay? It's hard not to, but don't take it personally. Number two is think of it as constructive criticism. Even if the way they wrote the presentation isn't in using terms that are constructive criticism, try to change the negative comments and ask yourself, what are they trying to teach me here? That's how you can change the negative comments into something that is usable for you as a presenter. It's not uncommon for us to do presentations that are in a group. So if you're a part of a panel, meet with the group afterwards. Talk about what you liked about the presentation, what you didn't like about it. Don't be afraid to be a bit more vulnerable and ask your colleagues what they honestly thought about you. What could you have done differently? I know we're not always comfortable with giving that feedback, but you might be with someone who feels comfortable in giving you that type of a feedback. And then think about how you felt during the presentation. Did you feel comfortable in general? And I'm talking about aside from nerves. Like, I generally don't. I know there are people who have stage fright and they're always nervous before they public speak. I'm not one of those people. I love to public speak, so I don't feel nervous. But I have noticed, and this is something that I teach, I represent lawyers and law students before the Moral Character Committee, and some of them have to have informal hearings. And one of my guiding rules for all of whether they're a lawyer or they're a law student, I tell them is if you hear yourself speak, you're probably rambling. And so that's something that I try to take note of when I'm presenting. If I hear myself speaking, that's probably because I'm rambling. So at that point, I either need to move on to the next subject, or I need to, ask a question. Maybe I need to take a breath. But I try to, during my debriefing process, note when was I rambling? And why was it? Was it because I didn't really know the material as well as I thought I did? Was it that someone asked me a question that I didn't feel comfortable answering? So I really try to think about that. And which then goes back to identify your weaknesses. Think about what were you weak at? Was it that you were weak on that particular subject? Or was it that, like I said, I'm just starting to incorporate hypotheticals. And maybe it was, like I told you, I let the audience get away from me, and I didn't read the audience as well as I thought I could. So next time I need to jump in a little bit sooner, even though I was enjoying listening to the banter back and forth. And then if you have a question and answer session, unfortunately in this presentation we don't have that opportunity, but if I were to have a question and answer, I would pay attention to what you were asking me. Were there certain parts of the presentation that you were more interested in or less interested in? I've found that in presentations, what I thought was really interesting, my clients and not my clients, but my audience could care less about. And what I didn't think was interesting, they did care about. And so you take note of it, and maybe you address it in the next presentation. Which leads me to, you want to continue to learn about your topic. I think most lawyers pursue being lawyers because we love the law. We love being lawyers. And so do not stop learning. That's absolutely essential. And as we all know, the law changes. It's constantly changing. And you really need to understand it. And that's part of your professional responsibilities, is to stay up to date about the topics that you're practicing in. And if you're turning those topics into speaking subjects, about what you're speaking about. If you're collaborating with third parties, again, ask them for feedback. And it isn't uncommon for us lawyers, when we're doing CLEs, to be not only presenting with other lawyers, but you might be presenting with someone who doesn't practice in your particular practice area. I've done that. I've presented with a criminal law attorney. Maybe the criminal law attorney is presenting with a psychologist. So you want to, I think those are great individuals because if they can understand what you're presenting about the law, then you did a good job. If they didn't understand what you were presenting, sometimes people chalk it up to their not being licensed attorneys, and that's why they didn't understand you. But really, if you have a command of your material, anybody who is a layperson should be able to understand what your presentation is about. Now we're going to move into improvement. Okay, if you're going to debrief, it's meaningless and it's a wasted exercise if you don't use that information to improve your presentation on future CLEs. And I think that's the problem as to why people don't do CLEs. Not everybody does CLEs. I know I have lots of friends who are attorneys, both through law school and just through my life experience. And I find it always fascinating as to why people don't do CLEs. I know that among most of my attorney friends, I'm one of the ones that does the most. For me, it's because it's easy. you all have to do 4 units of legal ethics. So I have a captive audience. I also know that's the best way I can get clients is by doing CLEs. But again, if that's true, why aren't more of us doing CLEs? I think it has to do with the improvement piece. So if you're going to debrief and you're going to spend all this time trying to understand what you did wrong, it doesn't matter if you're not going to improve. So how do we improve? First and foremost, you want to update your materials, especially if you're going to recycle your CLE. So you're going to update whatever materials you provide. So if you're giving out cases, you want to make sure that that case law is still good case law. Maybe there's a new case that has changed the rule, or maybe, we all hear about, there's the parent case. And for example, in legal ethics, there's Kirkland, which created the rule that allowed for a screening in California in 2010, but it had subsequent cases, or its progeny, as I like to call it. And so you want to know what happened. What made it change? Was the flavor slightly different with the outcome? Why was it different? Was it because of the practice area? Was it because of the parties? Was it fact specific? So you want to understand that, because it's going to really improve your presentation, and I think empower you as an expert, because you've gone out and understood this and taken that time. You want to change your PowerPoint, improve on those PowerPoints. You want to improve on your knowledge base, and that's what's essential. If you are going to be an expert, you want to improve your knowledge base constantly. And then based on your presentation, like I said, if you thought one subject would be more interesting than another, and then you find out that your audience was more interested in, I don't know, what has happened with me is, I'm going to use my experience since I do ethics. Everybody wants to talk to me about money, and I find that maybe this group really wanted to talk about flat fees, and that's all they wanted to talk about. They didn't want to talk about IOLTAs, but they wanted to talk about flat fees. So maybe my next CLE is going to be on flat fees, and I could expand on it, how to incorporate a flat fee clause in your engagement letter, how to account for time, where to place the money, how do you incorporate that clause into your engagement letter, what signatures you need, what happens if during the life of the engagement, a client fires you and demands for money back, those sorts of things. So I've taken a very discrete topic and expanded it, but I've applied what I generally do when I do my presentations is the life of the attorney-client relationship from beginning to end. So that's how I've evolved it, and I've gone into more depth. The same thing is true for you all. I also use in this material the example of Ethics 101. That's what I started doing when I first was a baby lawyer. I started doing Ethics 101 for new attorneys with my mentor, Mr. Fishkin. And the way we did it was I was the new attorney and he was the expert attorney. So we would talk about what new attorneys experience and how to apply the rules of professional responsibility. What I have found is that there is a commonality. I take the same Ethics 101, and then I have Ethics 101 for experienced attorneys. Here's the interesting thing. I do have to tailor it a bit more because experienced attorneys' needs are a bit different from the new attorneys' needs. With that said, what I do find is that both attorneys often don't know the rules of professional responsibility as well as they thought they did. And then you want to incorporate presentation styles that you've watched and that you like. Like I said, I really do like hypotheticals. I'm just starting to incorporate them in my presentations now. So then I don't have to talk as much. You also want to improve on your PowerPoint. For example, I'm looking at this one and I see little changes that I would like to do. It could be formatting, and that's the one thing that I'm seeing here. If the program is being recorded, ask for a copy. I know nobody likes to listen to themselves speak or see themselves speak, but ask for a copy. Pay attention to your tone, pay attention to your speaking style, maybe even the speed of how you speak, your body language, use of hands. Like I said, I do teach lawyers and law students how to do informal hearings before the state bar. They're now being done on Zoom. And so one of the things that I look for is I give my clients advice on their body language, because certain body language is going to denote different attitudes that you may have. And especially in Zoom, we're doing a lot of presentations on Zoom. And so, I've found that, especially if it's just you doing this in my case, I'm doing the CLE totally by myself. So you're going to see the slides in my face. And so that's kind of awkward. You see everything. You see how I appear, everything about me. And because of that, your audience is going to be a bit more aware of how you're presenting. If you feel uncomfortable with your presentation, your body language is going to show it. Your voice is going to show it. Yes, you only get in Zoom usually just, this much of a person, but that person, it says a lot. Using my client's example, I had one client when they were doing their practice prep for their presentation with the state bar, they kept on holding their chin and holding their body in such a way that they came off as very arrogant, very unwelcoming, and very angry to be there. So again, when you all are doing presentations, you want to think about, how are you coming off? What is your appearance like? It's all those little details. And I think it's especially important for people of color, unfortunately. We are judged by how we present, how we speak, how we use our body, our tone. Women can be deal with that too. I have a question. Have you ever changed your approach to your presentation style under current circumstances where the presenters are limited to virtual settings? For example, have you had to adjust your tone or presentation? Absolutely. Along with doing CLEs, I teach for JFK Law School, and because of COVID, it's all online. I've had to change my presentation style. The first time I presented, it didn't go well. So it might be where I give the class. It might be how I have my camera. There's actually, you all can look it up, Tom Ford. If you look up Tom Ford, he did a presentation on how to look good on a CLE or on Zoom. And so certain things that I have changed, I don't ever use backgrounds. I think they look weird. The other thing that I've done is I don't have the little camera where I can see myself, because I find that distracting and I tend to look at myself as opposed to looking directly at the screen. So if I could show you my screen right now, what you would see is I only see the PowerPoint and I see my little name, but I don't see a video of myself. So then I'm not distracted by that. A colleague of mine had said that she had just recently did her first Zoom presentation, And what she had done was she had pulled up one of our friends who was also in attendance and was able to see that friend. But what happened to her was that the friend turned off the video of themselves and only had their name. And so it kind of threw my friend off. So I don't do that. I only have the screen, and that's all I'm talking to. I don't know how it looks. Maybe I'll see it in, a couple of weeks and I can, I'll get a sense of it, but I'm hoping it looks decently. Another thing that I'm really bad at is updating your CV. That's essential. The reason why it's so important is that the more you have on your CV, if you want to become like an expert witness, for example, if that's one of your goals, then you want to have all of your speaking engagements, because that will eventually credit you when you have to be established as an expert in litigation. So update your CV. Essential. Use your presentation as an opportunity to network. Like, I would love to network with you all. The best part I love about giving CLEs is usually there's a cocktail hour, or there's a hors d'oeuvres or whatever, and you all get to chat, shake hands, have a drink. But right now we can't. I encourage any of you to reach out to me if you want to talk about this. I miss opportunities for networking, but CLEs a part of CLEs is the opportunity to network. Provide your contact information at the end. So then if your audience has questions, or maybe they need your advice on something, or maybe it could be that they have an opportunity for you to do a little bit of work, whatever it is, it gives them an opportunity to reach out to you. That's what this is for me. It's an opportunity for me to reach out other attorneys about what I do. All right. You're going to repeat this. I cannot stress, it is important to repeat. Like I said, most of our colleagues do not do CLEs. I think a lot of people that I know do it once or twice and then they walk away for whatever the reasons. They didn't enjoy it and they never want to do it again. Try different methods. Right now, big ones are webinars and video recordings and live video presentations. I do really like the opportunity when I'm able to do face-to-face presentations, but that's not happening right now. It will come back again eventually, hopefully. But so get familiar with that, with video presentations. Also feel very confident in yourself and know your audience, know who you're presenting to, and don't be afraid to offer the same CLE to different groups. I do that. I have an Ethics 101, and I can tailor it to anybody I want. I did this recently where a nonprofit wanted me to do an Ethics 101. I asked them to send me their specific questions that they needed, and then I tailored my Ethics 101 specifically to their needs. Combine materials from different CLEs. I have several that I do now. And so I can then create a new CLE by incorporating different CLEs. Review the topic areas, get new ideas, and always update your understanding of the law, because it does change. Review the format of the presentation. See what works and what doesn't work. Can you upgrade it? Also look for, and I can guarantee you there's always a typo, there's always a misspelling. It happens, we're human, especially if you're on a very tight schedule, sometimes you make mistakes. I looked at this and I found like one little typo, and it just happens. Incorporate the skills from your past into your new CLE. Look for different opportunities to speak. I cannot stress that enough. They're everywhere. You can do it through your local bar associations. You can do this through private bar associations or specialty bars. Law firms. Sometimes I do that too for law firms because of my particular practice area. legal research providers, conferences, anything that you might interest you. Give your CLE to that group. If you are asked to do CLE, say yes. Don't waste this opportunity. It's so essential. Giving, and I really want to stress that more often than not, our first opportunity to do presentations is diversity. I think it's a great opportunity. It can be hard for some of us because we don't want to be pigeonholed as the diversity attorney. But it's always a good start. And then you can move into other areas. And so don't be afraid to contact an organization and say, hey, I have this that I'm interested in. And you may not feel like an expert, but you might say to them, this is what I would really like to do a presentation on. I'm sure CMCP, you could contact them and say, this is what I'd like to do a presentation on. And you might not feel confident to do it on your own, but maybe the organization would hook you up with other mentors who are more experienced than you to do the presentation with you. Send that out to colleagues, and that's another way of being able to do a presentation that might be unique. I did that actually with CEB this year. It wasn't for ethics units, but when I saw that everything for COVID was going to shut down our businesses, I knew that law firms needed to start planning now in order to, it was back in March, in order to be prepared for what was going to happen with us all going virtual. And so my colleague and I, we agreed to do this together. I reached out to CEB, and I believe it was Raheel, and they liked the idea. We couldn't, because of the quick turnaround, we could not offer CLE credit, but we created this material and we did this presentation on legal ethics and COVID-19. It worked out great. Kind of obscure topic area, very, very needed right now, and it was an excellent opportunity for me. So don't be afraid to think outside of the box. And then what I did after that presentation is that I changed it a little bit to then create a blog post on that topic area. And then now I'm working again with CEB to update those materials. So that's how you can take something from beginning to end and make it that is very useful for others. Alrighty, now, which we're getting into presenting during the pandemic. Don't get me wrong, COVID-19 has created some interesting issues for all of us as attorneys, whether it's being able to meet with clients, whether it's issues that are happening in our courts. The list goes on. It has impacted every aspect of our career. So it has shifted for CLEs. For example, this CLE is not live. It is a recorded CLE. We are not having in-person CLEs anymore. Most bar associations are now offering Zoom or some sort of virtual platform to do the presentations. I really encourage you all, if you're going to do that, one, get to know whatever the software tools are, become comfortable with it, understand how to do it before you actually do the presentation. Ask whoever you're doing the presentation for what virtual tools are they going to be using, how they want it to present. There are some organizations may have limited resources. Don't be afraid to offer, if you have Zoom, offer your Zoom to offer that information. So then you can provide that platform to give the presentation. The other thing is make sure you're comfortable with using the technology. And that it does include, like I said, how you present on Zoom. I very much so discourage having the fake Zoom backgrounds. It looks weird. You're better off if you're in your bedroom, be in your bedroom. If you're in a makeshift office, be in that makeshift office. It looks cleaner and it's less distracting than a fake background. I prefer that over the fake backgrounds for certain situations. But this is my presentation. If you have any questions, would like to discuss this further, you can always reach me. My name is Mary Grace Guzman. I'm with Guzman Legal Solutions, and this is my email address. Thank you very much. And I have a question. Have you ever presented as a part of a panel? If yes, how was your experience different from doing a solo presentation? Do you like it, or do I prefer solo? Actually, I like both. A panel can be trying because it's just like, and it's kind of like that group assignment that we've all had where there's one person who does all the work and other people who don't do anything. That's the big downfall of of working on a group panel. But it also can be an opportunity, especially for a newer attorney when you're trying to establish yourself. So I'm often not afraid because I was with a law firm for a very long time. Then I went in-house at a large law firm doing legal ethics, and now I'm a solo again. So being a solo again, I had to reestablish myself a little bit with my colleagues. So what I did was I wasn't afraid to volunteer to do all the heavy lifting. It worked out well for me because now my colleagues trust me and they are more than willing to recommend me for other work or recommend me to do other presentations. And they're also willing to help me out when they need help. What I like about the solo presentation is that I get control over the material. But what is difficult about the solo presentation, it is just me, meaning that, everything falls on my shoulders with regard to legal ethics, and it's complex and it's difficult. I don't necessarily have a preference, one or the other. It really is dependent upon the presentation style and the topic area, and definitely who I'm presenting with can also be. I think the only difficult part is sometimes I have done presentations where it didn't feel as cohesive as I would like it to be, and it was because we didn't communicate as much as I feel we should have. And I think that's all the questions. And thank you again for the opportunity. This has been awesome. Thanks.